Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable, high performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore.
Hi there. Welcome to today's episode. Have you ever had somebody in your life, maybe at work, at home, in your personal life, who just drives you crazy? You just can't stop thinking about how much they annoy you. And you might be thinking, if only they change, things would get easier. Or maybe this is somebody in your personal life, or maybe in a community group. But what if actually the real solution to the problem is not them changing or them going away? What if it's more to do with something else to do with you? Now, the title of today's podcast, What If They're Not the Problem, might turn some people off even just clicking on this podcast, because their inner voice is probably going to have a go and guessing, well, they probably mean he's going to point the finger at me somehow, which I don't really want to deal with. And that's kind of partly true, but not the full story. And that's what I want to explore today. And ultimately, I guess what I am saying is that if somebody in your life is a problem for you, and let's face it, we're all human, I think. But even for me, this podcast is very relevant. I've seen areas where I've had the light bulb go on and go, oh, and then I've got other times when I've just dropped the ball and realized, yeah, that's not really good enough, Shane. But somebody is a problem in your life in any context. They're not the one who needs to change. It's actually you and me that needs to change. And today we're going to talk about why the path to inner peace, inner reflection, inner calm, and getting rid of that annoyance that other people can bring in, it starts with clearing yourself, not fixing other people. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't take action in terms of dealing with other people, and that's what I want to talk about. Now, particularly, I think in business, or actually just in day-to-day life, I just think it's very easy to blame others for tension or stress that you're feeling. Maybe it could be as simple as somebody being slow in a queue, or somebody pulling out in front of you in traffic, or somebody doing something you don't like in business. But the real power comes when you start to realize that actually how I feel isn't to do with them or the circumstances. It's really to do with how I'm reacting through my inner voice and my thoughts, because all of that creates how you feel. And again, it doesn't mean that I don't deal with somebody. And I think that's the subtle nuance here, because it's really more about understanding the tremendous power in shifting your own inner world, your own inner mindset, your reactions, and ultimately your perspective. Now, just to give you some examples that I think are universal, one would be where maybe you're speaking and you're dealing with somebody who just constantly interrupts you, or maybe criticizes you. And like that can be very annoying. And I'm somebody who has reacted to that and things like that. But the point I'm trying to make is that not that I don't deal with it. It's more to do with internally, how do I feel when I'm dealing with that situation? Am I losing my center? Am I losing my self-control? Am I getting angry? Am I basically knocking myself out of a good state? Another scenario might be where maybe you're dealing with a manager who manages you. Maybe you're that manager, or maybe somebody doesn't appreciate your work. Maybe that could be a board, could be a manager again. It could be even your team. It could be people around you. They just don't appreciate what you do. Or maybe you're dealing with somebody in your team who maybe is slacking off for whatever reason, or they're not quite on it. And maybe that's causing frustration in you, maybe even resentment. And see, the point is that inevitably in life, particularly in business, but in any situation, whether it's sport, business, family life, community stuff, people are going to do things you don't like, and they're going to do things you don't want. And it's the stress and the inner conflict that's created is not because of that. It's because of how we interpret what's going on, how we react to them internally. And that is where there is massive opportunity, massive leverage. It's what I'm really most interested in. It's the world of the inner CEO, where you're kind of going, okay, hold on. I'm reacting to this. I can actually, is it possible for me to be calm, centered, clear, and be in the same situation, dealing with the same person, even if it's about somebody who's very rude, keep my cool and deal with them in a very different way. So the inside, there's not that stress and tension. Because ultimately, if you think about it, and if you've been listening to me on this podcast, if you've done any work with me in my programs or even privately, you'll know that I will say that, look, stress and tension is created from inside us. And while that might seem logical, and you might even go, yeah, I know that. When you look at people, that's not really how they behave. Because if it's created from inside us, that means you can turn it off or stop it completely. I remember one of the first times that the penny dropped for me on this was years ago, maybe almost, as I'm thinking about it, scarily 30 years ago. I was a young executive. I was kind of starting to get into, I suppose, personal and professional self-development. I was starting to explore the mind, very early days. And I was in an office where there might have been 6 or 7 people. And one of the people there was very different to me. And they just kept on talking. And in my mind, it was like, hang on, place of work is where you don't talk. You focus and you get stuff done. And they kept on talking. And I used to get very frustrated inside with them. And I remember at one point reading, I was reading some book. I'm trying to remember what it was. It could even have been The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It might have been that at that time. But I remember thinking, hold on, my paradigm, my perspective is affecting my behavior, how I feel here. And what was interesting to me was I was able to shift my perspective. And I still could manage her and talk to her, but it was more to do with the reduction in my own tension around dealing with her, which then, if I didn't deal with that, would cause other problems like being frustrated or changing my body language, or just all my communication would be different if I was stressed inside versus not being stressed inside. I have so many stories with clients over the years as well, where in particular somebody's coming to mind where they have a very difficult relationship with their boss, who is a tricky individual at times. And they could be forgiven for saying, well, look, I get stressed because of them. And I get angry because of them and the way they're dealing with it. And on the outside looking in, you think, okay, that's fair enough. That seems reasonable, plausible, but it wouldn't be good enough from my point of view. So just by exploring, educating, increasing their awareness around their inner world, they were able to see themselves that they had a choice. So they had these kind of habitual reactions, even to the person walking into the room, where there was almost an expectation that they would do something or say something that would annoy them or cause them angst, inner angst. And then they start to realize, hang on, they don't have to listen to their inner voice as it reacts. And that in itself, simple as it might sound, was a game changer for them. And they experienced a genuine, significant transformation by more focusing on their inner state rather than external changes. It's just realizing that you do have a choice. That the trigger very often is, okay, somebody might appear, they might do something. But then you got to tune into what's your thinking, what's your inner voice saying, what you're thinking, and then connecting that to how you're feeling. I always remember there was somebody I used to travel with in business years ago. Good guy, very smart, very good in business, but they would always have a short fuse with waiting staff in restaurants, which they didn't seem to think was a problem, but it was just quite rude. And I remember talking to them about it, and they were kind of shocked that they didn't think that there was a problem, but I pointed it out. And it led to a conversation about, no, the staff aren't the problem, it's the way you're talking to them. And then he just shared with me the frustration he would feel in general, but it was very much habitual, based on the past, not really relevant to what was going on in the moment. And he thought he had, I guess, no control over it. He just thought it was valid, but it wasn't. And a metaphor maybe that might help is, I think when you're the person dealing with so-called difficult people, we don't think we're the difficult one, which is first of all quite funny. But people around us who we think are being difficult can act like mirrors, and they can reflect back on us elements of ourselves inside that maybe we don't want to face up to. And this is now as an area of potential real gold if you're willing to step into a little bit of inner discomfort. Because people that we think are difficult, very often, maybe they're touching on insecurities inside us, fears, sources of envy, or perhaps maybe assumptions that we need to address within ourselves in terms of limiting beliefs. Maybe they remind you of something from somebody in your life, or maybe they remind you of something in yourself that you don't like. And I, like a metaphor that really helps me or has helped me is thinking about clearing a lens. A lens will get dirty and it'll affect what you see. But if you might then think that that's reality until you clear the lens. But very rarely do we think about clearing the lens of our own perspective. And your perspective determines what you see. And you don't see what is, you kind of see what you are or what you're thinking. But maybe it's time to think about the lens. And I think getting that really crystal clear inner clarity is like wiping a dirty lens. Because when you clear your perspective, the situation becomes much easier to navigate with radically less friction, radically less tension, radically less frustration. And it's not to say that people are going around exhibiting behavior that perhaps isn't ideal or the standard. That happens. But it's more to do with inside you, how you feel in that moment. The calmer you are, the clearer you are, you'll know how to deal with the situation more effectively when you can kind of keep what I would say that is that 3C state, calm, clear, centered. So let's think about you. Who in your life feels like a problem for you right now? And what story or what inner reaction are you carrying or telling yourself about them? I wonder, could you drop it? Like what would happen? What would change if you approached them from a more neutral position, from a place of clarity and calm instead of frustration? Because when you let the frustration takes over, obviously your emotion takes the run of you. And then, I don't know, I know from experience, know from myself, I know with clients, once the frustration takes over, that inner emotional volcano can erupt and it really distorts your thinking. And then very often you'll say things, you'll do things that are not coming from the right place. And I wonder, would you be open to taking more responsibility for that inner state in you without waiting for that person to change? It is interesting to me that when you do that, it does seem to have some sort of huge influence over the person even you're dealing with. If you're coming from a place of centered calm, they very often will hear you in a way that when you're coming from anger or frustration, people react to that. You know yourself, it's happened to me. I react to people, people do that. They react to your state. So maybe as you're listening to this, think about certain people that maybe trigger you or bother you. Maybe there's behaviors you see in a general context in life that really trigger you or bother you. What are you telling yourself in that situation? Maybe ask yourself what story you're telling yourself about the person you're dealing with. Or maybe there's another perspective. Maybe you could change that story. Maybe you could reframe it. And as I say in business and life, like focus more on what you can control. Maybe consider shifting your attention to your inner reaction, your responses, and your mindset. Again, thinking about that lens. And maybe the simplest of all technique, if I share one, is, as you feel the inner volcano erupting, take a mental pause before you react. Take a breath, take a deep breath, take 2, take 3. There's nothing like a deep breath to calm the mind, keep you grounded and centered. Very, very powerful and free. It's simple if we're open to it. So before I close out with an action, just a little reminder. Today's the 8th. No, what is it? No, it's not the 9th. It's the 10th of February. I'm releasing this, 2025. In just over a week's time, we're going to be kicking off MindShift 2025, 8 consecutive weeks. Game changer program for most people that do it. We've got some people coming back because they loved it so much from last year. If that's you listening to this and you're kind of thinking, oh, will I, won't I? Get in contact if you want to ask me some questions, shane@shanecraddock.com, or else just go one step better. Join me and Gary Fox for what is going to be some fun, but I genuinely would promise you transformational time. So enough of that. This week for you, maybe consider taking one situation where somebody is pushing your buttons, somebody you don't like, or somebody is triggering you. And instead of focusing on them, focus more on you, inside you, and clearing your own mind, clearing that lens, changing your energy. Just see what shifts when you change your approach to them and to your thinking. Because ultimately, anyway, look, I can't control other people, but you can't control how you respond. So think about clearing that lens inside. And when you do, weirdly, people don't tend to annoy you as much. And you tend to get more clarity around what's the right thing to do, what's the more effective thing to say. And when you do that, your inner world just gets clearer. And then the outer world becomes far less irritating. And that's important. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.